This podcast is part of the Treksphere Network.
To find more Star Trek-related content, visit Treksphere.com.
This is going to be a very interesting episode.
It is. It is.
Said no one about Picard ever.
All right, who's kicking it off?
Well, I don't remember who did the last one. I think it was me. Was it me? Does it matter?
All right.
Does anybody listen anyway?
According to our emails, no. No one listens.
Nobody listens. It's all fake.
It's all bots.
It's all a prank.
As you can hear, I'm talking to an empty room. All right. So as you know, this is the Measure of an Episode, where it is our continuing mission to explore what makes Star Trek proper Star Trek and not just a modern day grim and gritty dark reboot. I'm Jonathan.
And I'm Paul. And the criteria by which we judge these episodes. Number one, is there science fiction inherent to the plot? This is very important. Very important criteria, that one. Number two, is that science fiction unique or novel in some way? Also very important and rare. And number three, is there a moral? That's ethical and moral together. Is there a moral dilemma presented by the episode? I'm Paul.
And I'm Jonathan, and Moracle definitely beats Ethel.
Yeah. What did we watch, Jonathan?
Well, we watched all 10 episodes, the entire series of Picard, because
Seasons 1 and 2.
No, we couldn't watch season 2 because it comes out tomorrow.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I mean,
so it didn't just feel very familiar. I was just watching Picard season 1 over again. Is that what you're telling me?
We watched seasons 1 through 9.
Boy, do we have a lot to say. Okay. I think what we should do, because there's so much information to get through, so much material, so much content.
I'm with you.
That we should lay down the law. What do we think of Picard? I want to know. So here's the thing. I have seen Picard a long time ago when it basically first aired.
Right.
Not thinking that we would ever be doing an episode on it.
Right.
And then I just recently watched it in the last week. And so I kind of already had my opinion on it. And we've actually talked about it a little bit on the show before. So I want to know, Jonathan, what do you think of Picard? Because this is your first time seeing a non-prime, no, it's not true, a live-action non-prime Star Trek show. That is prime, I realize that, but still not prime. It's barely prime.
What do you mean prime? It's in the prime.
It's the prime
timeline?
universe.
Okay.
Yeah, timeline, not Kelvin.
Right. Okay. So I kind of realized this around episode 7 or 8 that I did enjoy it. I really did like the series as a whole overall. But what left a bad taste in my mouth is the fact that it's advertised as MA. It's designed for mature audiences. And I feel like Star Trek should be accessible to anyone. Like the themes can be mature and the content can be mature, but I feel like as a whole it should be accessible. So like there are some episodes of The Next Generation and Enterprise that either go too dark or are too explicit.
Too sexy?
Yeah, they're too sexy that like you really shouldn't be showing to kids, but by the whole, you could pretty much pick any episode. And in this series, all 10 episodes, there was at least one moment, if not the entire episode, that was just too inappropriate. And you can't pick and choose which episodes you're watching. You need to watch them all to know what's going on. So I don't like that this is specifically designed for adults.
Or teenagers. I could see teenagers getting something out of this.
Sure.
And maybe that was the point. I think that if they had tried to, I understand why Picard is the way that it is. And I don't think we're going to be saying anything, hopefully something is new in what we're saying, but there will probably be a lot of topics that maybe have been covered before since this series is 2 years old now.
Right.
But I think I understand why they made the vibe of this show, the aesthetic, the way that it is, because it had to fit into a modern television experience. They could not just remake the old show. because it just would not be palatable for most people. And they have to make sure people watch it. And there just aren't enough OG Star Trek lovers who can support making a $100 million show with viewership. So I get it. I understand. But I have to say that in terms of it being a Star Trek show, I mean, we've talked about this before, even about actual Star Trek Prime timeline episodes, and that's actually what our show is about. Is it actually Star Trek? Or is it science fiction with Star Trek decals on it? And there was never a moment for me in this whole 10 episodes and all 2 hours of watching it at 9.5 speed. Did I feel like it was actually Star Trek? Like nothing was familiar to me. Save for a few moments in the entirety, all 10 episodes of the show, that I was like, oh, this feels like Star Trek. This feels like something Picard would do or say. Because it's about Picard.
But it was in like the last 2 episodes when that actually happened, at least for me.
Yes. I'm sure it's the same moment. And we're gonna get there, everybody. Just 9 or 10 episodes down the road, we'll finally get there.
Right, we'll get there in about 9 hours.
Yeah. In 2.5 months, you will hear what we have to say about that. But okay, so the first thing, the titular character, Jean-Luc Picard, JL, as he's commonly referred to, as from one of the characters.
Why?
I know, it's so stupid.
Why?
They're already one syllable.
Yeah, it's the same amount of syllables. And nobody, so I was thinking about this, and it's got to be that she did it kind of like as a joke or...
Because he hates it.
Yeah, as a little ribbing. Right,
yeah.
and he was like, don't call me that. She said it once, either after having been drinking or, outside of the ship or something like that. And yeah, and he was like, don't call me that. And she's like, oh, why JL? Like, does it bother you, JL?
It's just not an obvious thing. And
it's
frankly...
not. No, it really isn't. Like, JP, it makes way more sense.
Their relationship didn't seem to really...
I mean, we're getting so far ahead of ourselves, but yes.
Well, it doesn't matter. It doesn't... I actually... She was my least favorite character. I don't even remember her name. What's her name?
Raffi, which is also a children's song artist. So it was very difficult to separate those two when they were talking about the things that Raffi did.
Right. Wasn't that a character in Lion King? Raffi?
That's Rafiki, but yeah.
All right. But anyway, I feel like she never really landed for me. The whole... I mean, I understand they wanted to give somebody an adult characteristic of having an addiction problem of some kind. Unclear if she had that before Picard, I guess, alienated her. But I just didn't get that character. I didn't understand. I think she was supposed to be kind of quirky and very antithetical to Picard. Here's the problem, though, and this was the biggest problem for me in the whole show, is that Picard was unrecognizable, save for a few moments later in like episodes 9 or 10.
Right.
He was unrecognizable. Picard is not a warm person in the show.
Right.
He's not warm. He is not patient, really, with his crew members. When it comes time to save the planet, and when initiating first contact with somebody, he has a lot of patience. Right. But in terms of his ship and the crew on his ship, he suffers very little when it comes for just people. Right? He wants people to do their job. He doesn't want to see kids around. He probably hates that part of the Enterprise. Like, I'm sure he designs his route and his shifts so he doesn't have to run into them.
Right.
So that's the kind of person Picard was. And that was kind of the idea of the last shot of All Good Things. Is
that he's finally sitting down with his crew. Right.
Right. That he didn't do that. And so, okay, so maybe you could extrapolate from that. Well, he learned from that and he became a much warmer person. Okay, fine. But we're still in this show where the titular character, the guy that everybody comes to see when it comes to Next Generation crew, is unrecognizable. He's kind of this warm, dawdling old coot, who doesn't resemble at all the rigidity of Picard from the show. I understand that you're trying to tell me, oh, he's grown as a person. He's a lot more enlightened when it comes to interpersonal relationships. He even has 2 Romulans as pets. But it wasn't there. Like I wanted to see the old Picard, and it's not like they started him off as the new Picard, and he's slowly, when it comes time to go back into the void and accomplish a goal, go on a mission, that he becomes the old one. That didn't happen either. In fact, I would argue he's kind of marginalized throughout the show, to the point of dressing up like some sort of S&M character.
Pirate.
With a French accent. Pirate, yeah.
Yeah, an S&M pirate. You you covered so many things there.
Well, I feel like we should start general, and then we can get into the nitty gritty. But I wanted to kind of get our how do we feel?
Right. Well, okay. So just as you kind of argued my point, I kind of disagree. I mean, he discovered quote unquote new life with Daj, and he was very gentle with her, and then when he got the crew, I mean, he did show a little bit more empathy than I feel like he would have, but it also wasn't his crew. I mean, the captain kept acquiescing to him, but he was still just a passenger, like guest, crew member. No, it wasn't. He was still just a passenger on Rios' ship, and so he really didn't have a whole lot of commanding control until he did, or yeah, I guess until he did, because there was never a time where it was taken away. But
until they let him drive the ship a couple times.
Right. I felt like he was still doing the things that at the heart are Picard, where he had an idea of what he needed to do, and then he talked to the rest of the crew to see whether or not they agreed with him. The hard part that I had with this is they didn't agree with him. There was nobody who did these things because they thought he was making the right choice. He was either calling a favor or he was blackmailing them.
Or guilting them.
Yeah. And so that's what I actually had the biggest issue with Picard as the character. Like none of these people were his crew members because they agreed with his cause. They were doing it, one last time, or all right, fine type thing.
It wasn't a crew. It wasn't like, I'm going to get the gang back together. Fine. He said, I don't want to do that. I don't want to don't want to risk all of these septuagenarians' lives.
Right.
Going on a mission.
Right.
I want to get a new crew together. I understand that impulse, but it wasn't a crew. Everyone was reluctant. Mm-hmm. Nobody really cared about Picard. They'd heard of him.
Right.
But at the least, they had maybe heard of him, didn't really care about Picard. At the most, they resented him.
Right.
And didn't want to be there, but were forced to be there, as you said.
Yeah.
So and it never gets really past that. He's always just kind of standing behind the crew, as you said, as a passenger.
Yeah.
So it never felt like, here's the old Picard, even when they force-fed us that whole thing, engage, that whole thing, make it so. It wasn't, none of that landed for me.
Right.
I was never like goosebump, kind of like, oh, there he is. There's the Picard I'm waiting for.
Yeah. Well, and what was so interesting about that too is, it is kind of like nods and winks to the audience, but they couldn't decide if they were being serial or if it was episodic, because there were so many things that they talked about in previous episodes, like the artifact. They would call it the artifact, and then somebody in a later episode would go, "You mean the abandoned Borg cube in the Beta Quadrant?" Like. Yeah, we already heard that 3 episodes ago, and we're binge watching this. It's not like you need to remind me from something that happened 2 hours ago. I got it.
Yes. And I want to ask you, am I being an old coot myself?
Are you being a Picard right now?
Because I want to know, am I just being that normal fan rage? Fan rage? Is that what they call it? Nerd rage. Where it's not what I want it to be, and it's not the old thing, so therefore it's a bad thing. Because I feel like if you're going to make a show that carries the entire legacy of Next Gen, and arguably all of the shows, because they seem to encompass a lot of the shows. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure there are a million Easter egg types of things that I missed.
Right.
Because you just can't catch them all.
Right.
But I agree with the sentiment that you can't just keep remaking the whole show, that you have to make new stuff. But on the other hand, if you're going to make it a sequel, effectively, it's not really a reboot. There's no ground they're covering that has previously been covered. It's just a brand new show. It did feel like they found a generic science fiction show and renamed all the characters and peppered in some Star Trek stuff. But you could effectively delete out Star Trek from these episodes, and the remaining plot line would be fine. Right. And I know I'm being a dick, but I want to know, like, where is the line? Because they stepped way over that line of, well, we want to make a new thing. We don't want to do the old thing. But I don't know where it is. I don't know if I'm just being an asshole, or if you're going to make a show about Star Trek, make it about Star Trek.
Right. I mean, I think you kind of are. I guess the biggest problem with this series, with this season at least, that struggles with it being Star Trek is there's nothing that revolves around Starfleet. I mean, I need
all we get about Starfleet in this is that it's very easy to infiltrate.
Well, it's very well.
It's a bad actor.
Kind of. I mean, because Commander O, like, she spent years moving up the ranks and with that one mission in mind. So, she infiltrated, yes, but I wouldn't say it was easy. Like, she had a very specific goal in mind and she held to it after years of Starfleet indoctrination.
And it is said that she's half Vulcan, half Romulan.
Romulan, right. But no, so Star Trek and Star Trek The Next Generation are built on the foundation of Starfleet. Star Trek DS9 starts showing about the cracks of those things, and Voyager is about trying to uphold the Starfleet policies when Starfleet's no longer around. And the Enterprise, or not the Enterprise, Enterprise is about building Starfleet to begin with. And this show, I think this is probably what makes it feel the least about Starfleet, or Star Trek, is like Starfleet is just something that they abandoned. But as I'm saying this, I feel like Starfleet did play a big part in this series as well.
I feel like Starfleet played a role in this only in reference, because Picard is always saying Starfleet messed up.
Right, Starfleet abandoned you. Yeah, Starfleet abandoned me, right.
Yeah. So it's always in reference of this crumbling old picture of what it used to be. But there's never any execution of that. We don't really see that. It's only really reported to us. And they spend an awful lot of time on this whole Mars thing. Mm-hmm. And they even start, I think, the second episode. Yeah. With
the flashback to it, yeah.
Right. And it's really kind of a non-issue to me. I don't know. It's hard to put all of these things into the perspective of one giant narrative, because it jumps around a lot.
Right.
I guess. But I think you're right. I mean, they're all kind of about Starfleet in that, the various states of Starfleet, the states of decay, I guess, and how Starfleet is not just an organization, but is an institution of values that seem to be movable according to who you ask. I felt like there was never a centralized plot line that you could tune in, and even though it is very serial, that you can check in and be like, here's where we are in this grand mission that we're on.
That's actually kind of in my notes a little bit. It's more on the broad strokes of things, but the show is about finding the synths and protecting them. I mean, specifically finding Soji, and then it kind of, once they find her, it switches to finding her home planet. But there's like 4 out of the 10 episodes where it's just recruiting people and figuring out what's going on with Soji. So almost half of the series is just spinning their wheels and fleshing out the crew / characters. And so I think that's kind of why you're saying it felt a little aimless, because we had almost half of the series on things that weren't related to what the actual story was.
Right. When it came time to assemble a team, Picard didn't really even feel part of that process.
Right.
He went to Rafi and said, I need to go into space again and go find this android. And then she kind of puts together, she finds the guy, she finds
the guy.
Rios, yeah.
Yeah, like she doesn't find the crew, she finds the guy, who has a ship. Yep.
It would have been a much better episode for me if there was an episode dedicated to him putting a new band together.
Right.
And it doesn't just have to be a montage of him going to, your typical kind of heist montage where you got to get the band back together and it's kind of the Ocean's 11 thing. It doesn't have to be that, but something where Picard is actually the star of the show and not just kind of this other character, someone's grandpa that had to tag along.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just somewhere where he's taking the initiative. So we had Rios, who was given to him by Raffi. We had Raffi, who felt, I don't know, guilty, vindictive, something towards JL and needed to come along. We had Aggie, who was thrust upon them because it was her life's work and there's no way she wasn't going. There was Annie, Elnor, who was also...
the ninja.
Yeah, but who was also thrown upon him. He's like...
He went there to get him, didn't he?
No, he went there to get a ninja. And then she was like, hey, this kid that you abandoned, yeah, he's still here. Why don't you take him?
Who?
Right?
Yeah, it did not feel cohesive. That's probably a good indicator of the whole show.
See, and I would disagree. Like, I don't think it felt incohesive. It just it felt directionless. No. But it felt like Picard, not the series, but the character. It felt like he was directionless. He wasn't saying, I need this, and this. It was, okay, I need a ship, and that's kind of as far as my mind went. Oh, okay, you're here. Why don't you come along? Oh, okay, yeah, you can come too. That's fine. And then I guess I should probably get a ninja because ninjas are cool. And so...
Yeah, ninjas are cool. He was right about that.
Oh, I know. Yeah. And space... And I was trying to figure out if this was, like... Why in a group of female ninjas did he take the only male ninja, and why did the leader have to say he's one of the best she's ever seen? Like, it feels like just in our current progressive culture, that felt like a step backward, that out of all of the girls, the white savior was the right one.
Well, I mean, he could have... Eleanor, is that his name? Eleanor.
Yeah.
Could have easily been a girl.
Right, that's my point.
I don't know why... I don't mean he could have chosen another person who wasn't him.
Right.
But why not make Eleanor a girl? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, like it should have been that Elnor wasn't Romulan. Was he Romulan? Was he Vulcan?
Yeah.
He was Romulan? Okay. Yeah. So it should have been that Elnor wasn't Romulan. It was still a girl, but it was some other race. And that's what made her unique. And then, he abandoned her there. She still trained with them because that's all she could do there because she had nothing else to do. And she was one of the best that they'd ever seen. That would have been cool if it was a, Bajoran or Klingon or some other Trill, I guess.
Andorian, who had his antlers cut off long ago in training.
Right. Yeah, or even just one of them. No, that would be bad.
Yeah, he's always walking in a circle then.
Just constantly tilted to the right or left.
Yeah.
Always falling out of chairs.
But really good at fighting somehow.
Right.
So anyway, I agree with you. I think it is kind of aimless. It ultimately ends up where it needs to end up because they wrote it that way. But it doesn't feel like there's this inevitability in the plot lines. Well, it just is like, okay, what's going to happen next?
Right, but yeah, not in a... I mean, we talked about this in another episode too, but not in a way of like, you want to know what happens next, like what they're going to do about whatever's happening. It's like, okay, you're now in this situation. What are you going to do? I think you're right. The show was aimless when a twin was not part of the crew. Like when they were off doing their own thing and before Soji got back onto the crew with Picard. Like because she knew what she wanted. She knew what the goal was. She knew what they were doing. And, even with the stop off with Riker, it felt like a rest and not a side quest.
Well, maybe we should start going through the episodes now because it seems like we can't drill down now without jumping around.
Right.
But let's start with episode 1 and see how this goes. Because it's hard to do an episode by episode analysis of something like this and it not inform the grand analysis because it is so serialized.
Right.
So let's see how it goes.
Okay. So I'm just going to get my notes out of the way because it's like 3 scenes back to back to back.
Okay.
So when Daj gets to Picard and she's telling him everything that she's done about all the attacking and how she killed everyone and there was blood everywhere, he just holds her hands like they're there, it'll be okay. Like, here's a stranger who's just come up to you and said, I've killed so many people, and you were the person I was in my mind to go to. Like, he's like, yes, I understand. And
this happens to everyone.
Well, and you know,
You'll
she's
get
like,
through it.
she's like, I need your help. He gives a sigh that was just like, shit. Like, here we go again type thing.
It's another representation of how, this is not how the Picard I know would react to something like this. He's being this very avuncular, empathetic being who, fine, if that's who Picard is now, that's what you've deemed him to be in his latter years. But it's not someone we recognize. It could be anybody.
Mm-hmm. I mean, he is a sire. Like that is what he does in Next Generation all the time. But his sighs are like, that's a lot of information to take in. Let me process this for a moment. And this sigh was just complete resignation of, well, now you're the person I have to help. Like there was no, there wasn't any, let me process this for a minute. But when she was explaining things, she's like, how can I know things that you must think I'm crazy and blah, blah, blah. Like it would have been nice if he had just made a little comment about the things that had happened to him, like he's like, I've traveled back in time, or, like I've traveled through time or done a couple other things, I've met an omnipotent being. So, your story is small potatoes, girl, type thing.
Yeah, I guess he's not surprised by anything anymore.
Right. Right. And it would have been nice if he had like told her that to kind of make her stop going, you must think I'm crazy, or, why am I saying this type thing?
Right. Yeah, you're right. I think that they were trying to split the difference. They were trying to straddle this idea of like, we don't just want this to make this a quote show or a reference show, but we also, when somebody has a very long life in Starfleet, they're going to talk about that. So they were trying very hard to walk that very fine line of this is a show about Picard. He has to talk about having been Picard. Otherwise, what's the point?
Right.
And also not being a quote show. So
right.
I understand the difficulty.
Yeah. And that and I feel like they didn't balance that properly. Like Picard never talked about it, but everybody else did. Like, why did Aggie know one impossible thing at a time and make it so? And she's like, we should make this a thing, a Picard maneuver. Oh no, wait, that already is a thing.
Yeah, it just didn't feel those were just these superficial things thrown into the script. It felt almost like someone did a pass. Right. It's almost like someone said, "Okay, you person who's never seen Star Trek in your life, go write the script, and then this person who's seen the show, go back over it and pepper in some stuff that we can recognize." And that's kind of what it felt like, because nothing felt really super ingrained into the plot line.
Right.
There was nothing really about this plot line that had anything to do, except save for the Borg cube. That actually was, in my opinion, the most interesting part of this whole show. The fact that it had been, I guess they called it the Reclamation Project, whatever they called it, the artifact. It had been abandoned by the Borg or captured by the Romulans. I don't know which one it was. I don't remember.
Right.
And it was, and this episode ends with that. And I remember thinking like, oh, cool. Because when I first saw it, I was like, where are we going? Where's the intrigue here? Mm-hmm. And there it was.
Right.
There's the science fiction hook right there. Because the Borg have always been very interesting in that sense.
What I really like, kind of to speak to your point, was how the Borg cube became available. There was so much that was explained just in dialogue, which was really nice. Like, it wasn't flashback or told in detail. It was just in kind of throwaway dialogue. But they talked about how Romulans were not really part of the Borg. And they talked about how this Borg cube was just abandoned by the Borg. And they talked about something else, I forget what. But they then showed the flashback to the admonition, Is that what it was?
Yep.
Okay. And
This is later. This is not episode 1 anymore.
right. No. Yeah. Sorry. But just you talking about the Borg cube. I know. I was sorry. I'm bouncing around again.
I felt like that would have been a good place to do a flashback, though.
Right.
I felt like that would have been an interesting series of events
Yeah.
to show that happening, because the Borg is always interesting. Because during the show, they always kept just enough from you in terms of how it actually works.
Right.
Where you're always wondering, okay, what is it like? How is there a queen in a fully collective, in a full collective? And so when it's just reported to us, the most interesting science fiction concept of the show,
Right.
it feels a little like, well, what are we doing? So we want to spend more time in bed with the hunky Romulan and Soji? More just whispering into each other's ears about how they don't know each other's names?
Right.
Or should we concentrate on the Borg?
Yeah. There was. I mean, I get that there had to be an establishment of the relationship between the two of them and kind of the development, so we could really appreciate the betrayal of whatever his name was. Hunky
You know how
Romulan.
you do that? You come into the relationship having already started.
Right. Well,
Then
and
you don't have to do this development stuff.
they also established it pretty well. At the end of the first episode, they meet, and at the start of the second episode, they're intimate. Like, oh, okay, they've developed a relationship. Got it.
That last scene that you're talking about where we have this fly-through of the Borg ship. Or no, it kind of starts kind of in this, it looks like a warehouse. They haven't revealed that it's a Borg ship yet.
Right.
And then they show the meet cute of the hunky Romulan and Soji. And you're like, oh, there's another one. They were right. You know, something that had just been reported to us. By the way, that happens all the time in this show, where there's a scene where something happens, and then the next 2 or 3 scenes are other characters reporting what happened to characters who weren't there yet or
Right.
had not been there. That happens all the time.
The one that bugged me more than anything was when Raffi met her son, and then when she's drunk in her room with Rios, she tells him how she has a son. Like, we should have cut the scene about her meeting her son completely until, because they were questioning like why she joined them, why she took off suddenly, and why she came back. Like, you know, she's got to be the Romulan spy. So leave that hanging, leave that question in the air for the audience and the crew, and then have Rios go and talk to her, you know, and like see why she's so messed up, and have her explain it, and then go to the flashback of what she did on the planet, showing why she came back so miserable. So yeah. I agree.
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to say.
But anyway, back to episode 1. So
I thought we were
the show starts with Data. Well, we're not going to go through a plot line, but I want to point something out.
okay.
That the show is front loaded with Data, right? Bad hair toupee aside, because I don't think his hairline was ever that close to his eyeballs in the whole show.
Right.
But for some reason, they wanted to make it that way. Everybody loves Data. That's why the show opens with Data. You know? And I think that it's going to become obvious that he should have been much more involved with this show. Or not necessarily should have been, but why wasn't he, considering the end of the show? It's like, oh yeah, Data's alive. Spoilers, everybody.
Right.
But Data's alive.
For a show
right?
that's 2 years old, yeah. Okay, so you know, as we do on our podcast, how would you have included him in the series?
Well, you know, if I'm properly compensated, I'm happy to do a rewrite of it. But but I'm sure we could come up with something, a reason that, because he's sort of haunting Picard's dreams. Like, oh, I'm torn up about this whole scenario that went down about Data.
Yeah.
That we were good friends, and now I don't want the game to be over.
Right.
That's the whole idea. It kind of disappears a little bit, and I think that they kind of cover that. That when he leaves to go on his mission, he says, "I'm an old man waiting to die. I'm not living a life. I'm just kind of dwelling on the past," and that was sort of explaining the dreams about Data. Maybe that's good enough. I don't know.
No, I think you're right. Like, I think having to deal with Daj and Soji and synths and all that, it would have been nice to have more dreams with Data of Picard just trying to organize what's happening with Daj and Soji. I mean, and sorry, I don't think I can do this without jumping around. Like, why was it up to Raffi to figure everything out in the room of Rios. Like, if this show is Picard, why was she the one who was going around putting the pieces together to figure it out?
Well, you want to give some autonomy to other characters. I get that. It can't just be about Picard. Picard can't be Janeway. No, only Janeway can be Janeway. So
right,
I understand
but what I mean
that
is,
part.
like, why was it just Raffi?
I don't know. I don't know why so much was given to her as a character anyway. I felt like all the other characters I felt were very well established and centered as characters. Not as the characters themselves they were centered, because they were all kind of messed up in their own ways. But I mean, everybody, when they were the writing, it seemed very centered in terms of these are these characters.
They knew the characters
Rios,
well,
yeah, very well defined. Agnes, very well acted. I don't know if she was very well defined, because she seemed to oscillate between I'm on the verge of tears at any given moment. Like, if you bump into me, I'm just going to break down and just start bawling. And gives the kitschy, snarky dialogue, that kind of thing.
Right.
Which
I mean,
I guess those two can go together.
Yeah, there's a way to explain that, which it takes little effort, but still it wasn't telegraphed in a way that we would say, okay, that's who she is.
Right. If you think about River from Firefly,
Right.
she has a lot of stuff going on, a lot of baggage, right? There's a lot of stuff that's behind, especially in the show, not in the movie, but in the show.
Right.
She never is quippy when it's time to be quippy, right? And it felt like Agnes kind of felt like River in that there was a lot of stuff going on in her brain. Like, she was kind of being controlled by the Romulans, and she was suffering because of the emotional stuff that's happening from having witnessed the, what do they call it? The accommodation, admonition, secondhand. There's a lot of stuff going on in her head, but so she's similar to River in that sense, but River felt more cohesive as a character because she wasn't all of a sudden making quippy comments to the captain,
Right.
But they didn't have anybody else to give the quips to, so I guess they gave it to Agnes. Aggie,
yeah. I mean, they could have given them to Rios, but the other part of it too was just the character she was at the Daystrom Institute was not the character she was on the ship. And I know that, she had a traumatizing moment happen between those two, but it felt like such a huge difference between the two that I feel like to play those two pieces, it should have been a little bit more manic of kind of making those quips to like laughing to keep yourself from crying type thing. So she's making these comments, but she is like, she's on the verge of having a mental breakdown because of what she's seen and what she has to do.
Maybe it just didn't read for me that way. It just kind of read like, oh, she's going to make a fun comment. Because they wanted it to be they wanted to have some fun with the show, not all dreary kind of thing.
Right.
But, so I understand the need to put those in there, but I don't know. I think I'm nitpicking because we're going down a very large rabbit hole. So.
Yes.
But I will say, they say many times that somebody says Data always wanted a daughter. And so we got one with Soji and Daj and the two other ones who end up being in the show much later.
Right.
Never once a mention of Lal.
I know.
And I don't know if that was on purpose or if they felt that they didn't want to. It kind of polluted this whole idea that Data painted a painting of his daughter and all those different things. That Lal being a thing messed that up a little bit.
Yeah, but see, I don't think so. Like Picard could say something about like Data always wanted a daughter.
And tried to have one once. Yeah.
Yeah, and tried to have one, but like it unfortunately didn't work out or whatever. And that's the end of it. Like nobody would be like, "Oh, what happened?" Because you don't do that.
I guess that's what happens in these very serialized shows, is that you can't expect every episode to be hard hitting.
Right.
And it just was, yeah. Felt like they got so close to the science fiction. All the stuff about B4, the Data unit, and they just kind of they just brushed over it very gently. And they could have gone into a little bit more of why they had to be in pairs.
Right.
Why didn't Lal work? Why, in terms of it being a ban, I don't know. It felt like they had so many opportunities to really delve deep into it, and they instead opted for philosophizing about life and what's right and what I should be doing right now, and all those different things that are not very Star Trekian to me in terms of philosophizing, trumping the science fiction.
Right. Yeah. They should be woven pretty well together. And Picard's debate of whether or not to help was definitely the ethical or moral dilemma of helping dodge this synthetic life form, which was the sci-fi aspect of it.
But was it a dilemma, or was he always going to help her? There was never a moment where he's like, well, I don't know. This doesn't seem right.
Right,
you know, it's like,
but
not my kid.
Right, but when he finds out the second one is out there, he's like, I haven't been living, I've been waiting to die. That's where his ethical dilemma came into play.
I never got the impression though that he was torn. I always got the impression that he was helping Daj, and then she gets blown up.
Right.
Really dramatically. I mean, I would be traumatized.
Yes.
If I saw that in front of me.
Right.
And by the way, so when that happens, so the Romulan space ninjas spit something onto her?
Yeah.
Like a scene from Jurassic Park?
Right.
And is that something that all Romulans have? Or was that some sort of like pill? That
I thought it was.
like a cyanide
I thought it was
pill?
a pill. That's how I took it.
Okay.
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter, but
Right.
that would be an interesting little physiological thing about Romulans we didn't know.
Right.
And for a show about Romulans, we still know very little about Romulans.
Yes.
That's another missed opportunity of the show is, hey, remember these characters or this race of characters and beings that was just barely brushed over because there was this fog of war with these supposed enemies of the Federation. And now we finally get an in-depth look to them. And we don't get an in-depth look to them. It's just more mystery. I don't know where I was going with that.
Well, right, but I think also part of that is me. I don't think this is intentional, but I appreciated that because the Borg have lost a lot of their bite because we have seen more and more about how they work and what they do. And villains are scariest when they're vague and mysterious.
No, that's true. That's true. I just would have been nice to have a little bit of insight.
Sure.
I mean, we can talk about the horny Romulan sister.
That was so weird that she turned out to be a sister.
Well, yeah, very strange and also unnecessary. Nothing ever comes from that,
Right.
Other than just that's the way that they are. She's just a horny sister who is hot for brother, and
it felt very
he's, like,
Star
over it.
Wars. Like halfway through the series, they were like, "Oh, what if she's his sister?"
but it's like not hot. It's just annoying for him.
Right.
It's actually more kind of Game of Thrones.
Yeah, that's true.
Where
That's
I don't know but except he's not into it at all. He's like, man, I don't know why you've been doing this since we were 12. And I'm obviously not into it.
Yeah.
Can we stop?
Yeah. So a couple things in episode 2. These are just kind of scene observations. The Golden Gate Bridge, I don't know if you saw this or not, but was completely covered with solar panels.
I found that very interesting. I did notice that the second time. Didn't notice that the first time around, but I did notice that. And it felt like, okay, so now the Golden Gate Bridge is kind of a monument. It's not used anymore,
right,
for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
So that was kind of cool. I like that they were using it for something, and it wasn't just kind of a museum type of thing.
Right. And then also in the Borg cube, they had the chalkboard of how many days have passed without incident.
I saw that. No, it's without assimilation.
Oh, is that what it was?
They've gone
Okay.
that many days without assimilation. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was great. Little humor for everybody. See? They can do it. It's done. I
Right.
want to know. And the guy, I don't know if you remember, but in the second episode when there's sort of the Romulan, he was talking to a bunch of workers before they went into the cube. And it felt so much like they were at a Disneyland ride where they have the actor guy give you the safety protocols disguised as something diegesis in the show.
Right.
Right. That's what it felt like to me because he was kind of overplaying. It was a little hammy.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that was on purpose. Did they want it to feel like that? Like it felt so much. I don't know if you've written it or not, but at Disneyland, the new Star Wars land, Galaxy's Edge,
Right.
they do something exactly like that, where there's a guy on a platform talking to all the riders who are on the main, floor, and he's kind of giving you a little bit of storyline and a little bit of buckle your seatbelts type of thing. Exactly like that.
Have you been on the ride?
I've been on it, yeah.
Okay. Are you talking about the guy in the trench coat at the beginning?
Yeah, I mean, I know it's animatronic. But
okay.
Same concept, right?
Okay. Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
I was just gonna be impressed, like, because I haven't ridden it, but I've seen the build of him, and so I was going to be impressed that it looked so realistic in real life that you were like, this guy who comes out,
No, the first time I saw it at Star Wars Galaxy Quest, whatever, I thought it was a real guy. And then all of a sudden he started making, like, there was one weird movement. It's like, oh, wait a minute. Is that a real guy? And it takes you a minute or so to really, okay, that's fake. But it's so impressive.
Right.
Because you don't know. Like, you don't, when he first comes out, the movements are so good that, and he's so far away,
right,
that you're kind of thinking, wait a minute, is this a real dude?
That's cool.
It's cool.
But I
want to talk about Star Wars for a while?
Right.
But okay, so we're kind of blending all these episodes together.
So then Raffi shows up, or he goes to Raffi, and she comes out holding a gun at him, and he starts walking away, and he's like, but I've got some of my wine. And she's like, GD, all right, bring it over here. So what is their history that made her threaten him with a gun? And the fact that he had wine, why not just be like, thanks, shoot him, and go grab the wine?
Now, I may not have been paying attention enough.
Okay.
When we get sort of the context to their backstory. But I think all that happened was that he got her fired.
Right?
Unless there's something else that's implied or that I missed or something, but all that happened is he resigns, which basically means that she has to resign or that she is kind of out of a job in some way, and that's it.
Yeah. Totally worth pulling a gun on him.
And that was just them being dramatic.
Right.
That was them, how can we have this scene be where how can we put these two people at odds to the nth degree?
Right.
Because this is not science fiction anymore. It's like, oh, we're going to be a Western for a second. Because that's like every Western. Some guy comes back after having been gone for a long time.
Right.
And is greeted by the woman.
You got some nerve coming back here. Right.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. Same thing.
Yeah. So this episode in particular, like there was no sci-fi. It was just mystery and intrigue of like all of the Borg and I'm not even clear whether or not there was a moral or ethical dilemma in this episode. So this episode, I was like, no. I enjoyed it, but it's not proper Star Trek by any means.
Well, I feel like we need to once again establish that science fiction does not mean ray guns and spaceships and beaming. All those things, yes, are futuristic.
Right.
But in terms of, at least for us, science fiction is a concept. It's an overlaying concept that is embedded into the plot. It's not just the fact that they have
it's not the setting, it's the plot.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Like you can't just have, which makes me very curious about The Measure of a Man. Like you can't just have a legal procedural set on a spaceship and call that sci-fi.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. I don't feel like any given episode is going to have any science fiction in it for me, except for maybe little things peppered here and there. Like this to me, Picard as a whole, I don't feel like was science fiction to me. I mean, there were some brief concepts that occurred that they kind of stumble upon, and we can get to them as we go through the show. But it never really locks into a concept and stays with it. Other than the idea that a synthetic, we're not calling them androids anymore, we're calling them synthetics. Synthetics are people too.
Right.
That's a theme across this whole thing. It's not really explored. It's just sort of reported to us that it's something that is in the minds of everybody, but never really, how is it explored?
Right.
At all? I don't know.
Right. So I would argue, kind of like what I said at the beginning, 4 of the episodes very clearly are not sci-fi at all. They're just character development, and they're moving the plot forward, which is why we couldn't do this episode by episode, because it's kind of like what we tried to do with one of those episodes of DS9. It ends on a cliffhanger and nothing is resolved, and the story is still going on, which I guess is why the story is not resolved. But you can't watch a single episode and say, okay, so yeah, this is sci-fi or this is not, because there's so many outstanding plot threads that you can't just watch one episode and determine it. So along those same lines, like the MacGuffin to this whole series, which is ultimately what it is I feel very, very sci-fi oriented. You know, like you said, the synthetic lives.
The problem is that so we come into this with synthetics already being banned. But the problem is Star Trek never really dealt with synthetics. It had data, and it had lol, and maybe one other instance of some sort of synthetic life form. But it's not like we were coming from synthetics having propagated throughout the culture of Star Trek. It was just data, really. Well, we come in and they give us a brief backstory at the beginning of episode 2 that they have somehow integrated a primitive form of data in terms of androids or synthetics. And then all goes haywire and they're banned. So we missed a whole era of synthetic integration. And we're supposed to kind of care about that jumping into after it's almost like a character having died before an episode starts or before a show starts, and everybody's all bummed out about it, but the audience doesn't care because we didn't know the character.
They're given a job to do, and I mean they're just very fancy tools
that people don't really respect. I mean, so this is a common theme, I think, in the whole show,
right?
Which is the subjugated race or the subjugated life form. You know, they talk about it with the Borg, talk about it with the synthetics and the previous synthetics that were banned. You know, they were kind of just automatons, but they were still, you got the impression that maybe they had feelings of some kind. Maybe like it was very, like when they were having that whole scene on Mars where they were kind of disparaging against it or him or whatever you want to call it. And you don't really know if it was hurting the synthetics' feelings or not, but we kind of sighed almost for a second with the synthetic because they're being just bullies toward it.
Right.
And so that is a common theme. It's not science fiction, but it is something that was woven through the plot.
Yeah, it's so weird too because they're definitely condescending towards the robots, but you're not condescending towards fridges or ovens, you know, or even your car. Like I mean, at best, we treat them almost like pets, you know, like people take good care of their cars and they give them names and, you know, how they have to like take them in for proper care and maintenance and all that kind of thing. And we get mad at them when they don't work, but we're not derisive of them.
No, but those scenes, the way that the humans interacted with the synthetics does not paint humans in a very good light, I would say.
Well, right.
You're just kind of being bullies toward it.
Yeah,
right?
that's
like you're not that way toward a hammer.
Exactly, and that's my point. Like so, you know, we're supposed to sympathize with the robot, but the thing is, this robot has been given a very clear, specific task. Data's job was not to be on the Enterprise. Data's job was not to, be the lieutenant commander. He made logical but still decisions for himself based on the outside stimuli. And that's why Data was so unique, and that's what Starfleet has never been able to do. So it's weird that there is this you're right. I mean, that's where the disconnect is in this episode now, thinking about it. Like they're banning a specific type of robot. They're just discontinuing it. They're like
that's true. They banned research on it because I get the impression they were very close to developing a data. Well, they did. They developed a data-like thing, and then the ban happened, and they could no longer continue the research. It's unclear to me. So let's get into Agnes a little bit.
Okay.
And this happens in between episodes 2 and 3 or something like that.
Right.
Where she's still at the Daystrom Institute, but Bruce Maddox, who we learn is having a relationship with Agnes, and also they are both geniuses when it comes to engineering synthetics. But she remains at the Daystrom Institute, but Maddox leaves and goes and continues his work elsewhere.
Right.
It's never really established why Agnes doesn't go with him. We get this impression that she misses him and she misses the work, but why didn't she go with him?
Right.
Because there's nothing for her to do at the Daystrom Institute anymore, except nothing?
I mean, maybe I missed it or it just wasn't shown, but I inferred that he left unexpectedly and suddenly. And so she didn't she didn't know where he went or when he was leaving, and so she was just left behind. But you're right, like he should have offered because she literally was just hanging out. Like her job was moot at that point.
Well, yeah, and they were in a relationship.
Yeah.
And I'm getting kind of tired. This happens a lot in this type of show where a character will say, I didn't want to endanger you, so I went and did this other irresponsible thing that's arguably worse than endangering you. It's like, I didn't want to involve you, and so that's why I lied to you, and I killed your mother, and I left the planet.
Right.
It's like all these things. It's such a crutch at this point for character motivation. Mm-hmm. It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Right. Like at this point, a better choice would have been where he did offer it and she didn't take it, and she's been regretting it ever since. Which
we kind of get. She said at I think the last episode, she didn't have the guts to go with Maddox, but it wasn't clear why it would have been dangerous. I don't know. I feel like it doesn't really matter because it doesn't really enter into the plot that much, except when she kills him.
Right.
In terms of episode 2, it kind of ends. How does that one end? It's so kind of...
Episode 2 ends with Rafi showing up, saying you got a lot of nerve coming around these parts.
Oh, right. Oh, yeah, and then there's a little bit more of the Borg reclamation project.
Yeah, that was in episode 3.
Right.
And episode 3 irritated me so much because it also started with present day, and that always bugs me, even like from movies from the 80s where it says present day. Like I'm watching this in 2015, 2020, 2025, whenever. Like that's not present day anymore.
I know. Yeah, that's a good point. Well, they do this thing where they say 14 years ago.
For the flashbacks they did. Yeah, it was like 2372, 15 years ago. And it was like, okay, like that establishes it.
Well, because nobody knows. They never establish what present day for the show is.
Right.
I guess we're supposed to do that math, and maybe that's the easiest way. Like we know what they mean, I guess. But why assign years to it? It doesn't matter.
Well,
just say you can
give the year, like say present timeline or current, not even current timeline. But I just don't like when it says present day. Like that's today. And so that this is 400 years in the future, and they're saying it's today.
It'd be funny if everything was relative to our time. So it's like 425 years from now. Right. And then later it's like 475 years from now. We're just supposed to do math the entire show.
But even then, that would still irritate me because 30 years from now, that would be wrong.
That's true. Just eliminate a reference to a specific time. You don't need it. We can tell when it's back in time. Everything is different.
Just put
Actually, what they should do, just put a toupee on Picard.
There you go.
And then we know it's in the past.
The Arrow TV series did that, and that actually became a running gag on recaps where the toupee actually had its own plot line. So episode 3 was the episode that introduced XBs, and that's another thing that irritates me. It's like JL. You are literally doing it to be edgy and hip. I mean... Ex-Borg takes just as much vocal power.
Well, it's not a good slang term for it. They should have had like screws or something like that. Something that was kind of derogatory toward them,
right?
In some way, or that they can
Skags.
It's yeah, something like that, where it wasn't just taking the first 2 letters of the 2 words and putting them together. It's just very uncreative. It wasn't world building. There could have been a much better world building aspect to that, where the ex-Borgs use it for themselves and appropriated it because it was using against them disparagingly.
Right.
That would have been more in line with their theme instead of just not saving time with their new abbreviation.
Yeah. No, that's true.
And so I have an idea. This would have been a much better introduction to 7 of 9 as opposed to the way she just kind of comes in and saves the day later on. I think that's in episode 4 or something like that. Why not have her be part of the Borg reclamation in that she was reassimilated by the Borg at a specific point. And then she gets rescued again. And so she's even more fucked up than she was in Voyager. She has this weird, she's like ping-ponged back and forth between being a human and being Borg. So she's just totally messed up.
Yeah.
And so she's part of that. She is reclaimed by Hugh. And
she's reclaimed from the reclaim.
Yeah. Yes. And so she doesn't work for it. She's kind of in that crazy part of the ex-Borgs who just haven't quite reassimilated back into, wrong word, that's a trigger word, reinserted themselves back into human life. And so why not, that's more interesting. Then we get a little bit more, integration of the previous shows and everything than her just showing up out of nowhere and saving the day later on.
Well, yeah, and it also would have been fun. Like maybe she is now part of Starfleet because there was that bar owner who wanted her, and she's now a part of Starfleet. And she has essentially asylum, and so she doesn't want to leave the Borg cube because she knows that when she leaves, she kind of becomes an outlaw, and anybody can just capture her.
Or maybe after Ichep she witnesses the slaughtering of Ichep. That she just loses it, and she can't take the pain, doesn't have the courage to kill herself, so she basically gives herself up to a Borg cube. And then eventually she's recaptured. She was part of that cube that was recaptured, and she just she somehow, and for whatever reason, Hugh recognizes her or something, and gives her extra special care,
Right.
and rehabilitates her, so she's the 7 of 9 that we always knew.
That would be a beautiful kind of like mess up where she struggles with that desire to be part of the collective, but the knowledge and desire to be an individual as well.
Yeah, she can't tell which one she wants more.
Right.
And there's even a moment where Eleanor
Eleanor, yeah.
says, when she retakes when 7 of 9 retakes the Borg ship. I see what that was funny. No, I know he's a boy, okay? When he says, "Are you going to assimilate me now?" And she kind of looks at him, considering it. And that would have been a nice little nod to this headcanon that we've just come up with.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, yeah. So speaking of kind of character development that they didn't do, Raffi, just thinking about what you said, how she was kind of not really, she was the least developed character. And then thinking about my frustration with her kind of solving the Romulan situation on her own, or maybe the synths, whatever she figured out. It would have been nice if that was kind of her character. You know, she has to stick with a puzzle or a mystery until the end. And so that's why she joins Picard, because he gives her the situation, the mystery, you know, and she's like, never again, I'm not going to do anything with you and blah, blah, blah. And as he tells her more, she gets more intrigued and more excited about it. And she does wind up joining him because it's a mystery that has to be solved.
We get a little bit of that because there's a point where she says no, F off, and then he sends her all of the data on Saj.
Yeah, that's true.
We get a little bit of that,
Right.
but that's never really expressed after that. She's just sort of the matriarch of
Yeah.
the whole thing. She's very motherly, even though her own family has rejected her as a mother.
Right.
She's very motherly, but I didn't care. I didn't want it. It didn't feel like she fit in. It felt like they wanted this kind of oblique character,
Right.
and it just never landed for me. I didn't care. And ultimately she kind of suffers. She's a very suffrage character. Suffrage? No. She could probably vote. But internal strife, I feel like she has the most. And I just don't have time for it. I don't have the energy to put in emotionally for her for some reason.
Right.
I might be alone on that. I don't know.
So, quick side note: in this episode, I lost interest, so I did actually speed it up. And the sound effect of Raffi receiving the call from Picard at 1.8 speed is 100% Mario swirling his cape from Mario World.
I guess I'm now gonna have to go find that sound,
Right.
and put it into the podcast because you said that.
But yeah, like put in the Raffi ring and put in the Mario swirl.
By the way, the end of episode 3, which everyone was waiting for, once Picard gets onto the ship, where they've cocked the engines and it's time to go, and they all look at Picard,
Right.
and he says, "Engage," and they quote the Star Trek theme. I think it's the Next Generation theme. So didn't earn it.
Nope.
And it not only did they not earn it, it's so out of place.
Yeah.
because it's a very dark and broody plot line. People have just been disintegrated before our lives in a very gruesome way, and violence and fighting and yelling and F-bombs being dropped by admirals. And then it's ba, 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 ba. And it's just like, nope.
Yeah, nope.
You lost me.
Yeah, well, and also, like, why were they waiting for him? I mean, he's a retired admiral. He doesn't have any command on this ship. Why are they turning to him and waiting for him to give the signal?
We know why, because they're taking the place of the audience too. We're all just watching you, Picard. What are you going to do?
Yes, I know, but that's...
But what? See, Picard would have just said it. Even he would have disregarded, not Rosti. Who's the captain of the ship?
Rios?
What's his name? Rios. He would have just disregarded Rios and said, engage. Lay in a course, engage.
Right.
And that would have been, he would have done it. And they would have, maybe that's when they look at him. It's like, oh yeah, I'll sit down. But that's what Picard would have done.
Right. That would have been amazing, where he like sits in the captain's seat, says lay in a course for whatever, and he says engage. And Rios is just standing there watching him. And Picard like looks up at him. He's like, this is my ship.
Which they handle a couple of times. They have that awkward interaction. But it just didn't, that whole ending, they do it a couple of times. And I think they do it 3 times.
Right.
And never once does it land for me. It just feels cheesy. It feels like you're winking to the audience.
None of the final closing moments with Picard dying or the little epilogues for all the characters felt earned. Like, I'm thinking specifically of how Picard doesn't say anything to Eleanor when he's dying. Like, he just gives him a look and Eleanor nods and Picard kind of gives a little nod back, and that's kind of the end. Like, that did not feel like it was earned, like it didn't feel like they shared too much with each other and so they didn't have to say anything now, or enough was said before, or like, they knew how to understand each other without words, and so this was a final moment between the two of them. Like, that never happened either way.
I like the idea that Eleanor misinterprets the nod and immediately decapitates Picard.
Right. Yeah. Just ends his life right there.
I don't think it's what he meant, Eleanor.
Right. And like Seven and Raffi interlocking fingers, I don't remember them ever meeting, let alone having any kind of meet cute or tension between the two of them. So to kind of suggest that the two of them are bonding romantically over Picard's death and all of his farewells with all of his new crew, just they weren't earned, and it was very eye rolling rather than poignant. So moving on to the next episode, episode 4. It's just kind of wheel spinning. Is this the episode where they get Eleanor?
The ninja.
Yeah. And there's a scene where Picard is talking with Raffi and she says, I'm going to be straight with you. And he says, what a refreshing change. And this is clearly like a reference to their past, but not to this series. Like, she has been direct with him from the first time we saw her in this series.
Also, what kind of relationship do you have if your main partner is lying to you all the time?
Right.
Why would you want that person as a partner if they're never giving it to you straight?
Or just being manipulative or passive aggressive or whatever. Fine, if that's the way you want to do it, do that.
Right. Yeah, and there's a lot of
you
this.
You have something to say, Raffi. No, it's your ship. You do it. Whatever.
Yeah, that's what you want. You want a passive aggressive number 1.
Right. Is that your call?
Yeah. Ooh. Yeah. All right.
Right. I mean, if I were the captain, I would have done something different, but you're the captain, so.
Right. Yeah. And so another thing it's wearing thin on me. It's been wearing thin since like the 2nd episode, but more of the Soji being even more entrenched in the Romulan love affair type of thing. It's the same thing. Who are you? I don't want to tell you, and that's why he's exciting, because he's mysterious,
right?
And he's a hunky Romulan. It's no longer hunky Bajorans. It's hunky Romulans.
Yeah.
I didn't care. Anytime, like, when does this happen in Star Trek? That's where it's not just sort of a passing peripheral thing, where it's actually a plot line.
Right. I mean, it happens with what was it called? I think Tabula Rasa with Crusher banging a ghost.
Banging a ghost.
Yeah.
I don't remember that.
Oh, yeah. We'll get to it.
Okay. Now?
So I agree, but I do also feel like it needed to be there for a certain extent for like the betrayal to hit so hard. But on the flip side of that, then we shouldn't have. There's so much that is. I've already said this, but there's so much that's telegraphed, and it doesn't have to be. Like with better direction, with better editing, these reveals could have been so shocking. Like him taking her into the meditation room and then locking her in there, or him having to go back and forth between telling his sister what his actual plan is and lying to Soji, but then also telling Soji at the end that he did love her for no reason.
Yeah. I guess we're supposed to wonder, does he actually love her? Or, is he actually now torn between two idealisms? Ideals?
Yeah.
That kind of thing?
Yeah.
Which never comes to fruition, really.
No.
And the fact that they're brother and sister, their names I do not remember. Narek, I think is his name.
Yep.
And her, she's just too fabulous of a villain. She's too Evelyn. I never bought into it. This is not. I guess you could say it's more referential to the original series because that's how the villains were in that.
Right. Like she enjoys being evil, right? She doesn't think that she's the pioneer of a cause. She just, she's being bad, right?
There's a line in there where an underling of hers says, we have to become more violent with them. She's like, ooh, I like it. More violence. It's like she's almost to Austin Powers
right
level of like ridiculousness. And okay, if you want to make her indicative of the original series villains, fine, but pick a lane. Because you can't have this super dark, edgy, modern science fiction show and then have a villain that's out of He-Man.
Right.
Evelyn was He-Man, right?
Yeah, Evelyn's He-Man, yeah.
Okay.
That's why I'm with you. I'm understanding your reference is perfect.
I don't want to
He-Man
offend
fan over here, right?
He-Manians. I only do that on Continuum Drag.
Yeah.
I can tell you have not listened
nope,
yet because
the layer gets peeled back,
I have given you a clue,
right?
Sir.
Yeah. All right, I'll go listen to it. I won't, but I'll keep saying I will.
So anyway, what was I going to say? Oh, so there is a little moment that made sense to me from a science fiction perspective. This is one of those peppering into science fiction that I was talking about. So there's a point where they have to evade, Rios has to evade attackers in the ship. And he says, auto evasion protocol, engage. And I was like, how about that? The computer is now going to drive the ship.
Right.
Because a human could not do what the computer can do in terms of the optimal amount of evasion, right? Because this is how it would be, except for the fact that he's driving the ship, it seems like most of the time.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't need to do... Actually, they're a little bit further that they have all these EMHs or EMs. Emergence... No, EHs. H's. They just have H's. I'm surprised his name is an H.
And he just has it stamped on his forehead.
I actually liked that. I felt that whoever plays Rios did a pretty nice job in keeping me engaged with all of the different characters who embodied, he embodied in terms of the, hospitality hologram and the medical hologram. And there were 4 or 5 different others that we see. They're all in a room at a certain point.
Right.
And it never feels weird or awkward or stilted when they're all interacting with each other. Mm-hmm. It was reminiscent of Star Trek, perhaps.
Elaborate?
It just felt like, if you think of the Doctor had his serious moments, but he was kind of the comic relief of the show.
Right.
And don't tell me Neelix was the comic relief.
I won't.
He was what kept everybody on the edge of whether or not they were going to be canceled. But, the Doctor from Voyager was kind of always cantankerous, and he had a lot of personality. And I felt like this felt like an extension of that, where they're not just sort of personality-less holograms that are there to do a job.
Right.
They all have their own little personality that you kind of get to know and like, and they all had that. So props to them, I felt.
Gotcha. Yeah. Well, and it was nice that each character had their own personality, essentially.
And accent. I understand that maybe I'm just saying they had an accent and that means personality.
Right.
But you did kind of feel like, oh, I want to get to know this person.
Yeah. The two elements that did bother me, one of them without explanation and the other one, it just bothered me, was the engineer being Scottish, that I felt that was an unnecessary
Reference. Yeah.
nod to the fans. Like it was just I don't and I don't know if that was the actor's choice or if that was, I don't know whose choice that was, but it just seemed too overhanded.
So I'm going to do a little headcanon here.
Okay.
My headcanon is that, okay, maybe the idea is that Scotty, Mr. Scott, is the most famous engineer and had the most effect on engineering in Starfleet that any engineer had ever had. And so that was the nod internally, and not the writing, but the plot line. That character was Scottish for that reason. What if it was him doing an impression of Geordi instead? That would have been more interesting.
Just kept his eyes like the electric scanning the entire time.
Right. Yeah. Or give him some implement of an eye thing that was referential and make his personality, the way he had a cadence. Mm-hmm. He wasn't just, Geordi he had his own way of talking.
Yeah.
So do that. I don't know if it would have been a little bit more subtle and not an overt kind of cheeky reference.
Right.
At that point.
Right. And then the other one was how the psychiatrist or psychologist hologram just did not deal with personal space at all.
Yeah.
Like that.
Yeah. He was bad. Just bad at the job, that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. And I just like they talked about how he went in and messed with their systems anyway, and it would have been nice if there was some kind of explanation as to why he decided to take out the understanding of personal bubbles.
Because comedy. That's why.
Right. And that's literally why the captain did it. He's like, because it would be funny.
Yeah, because it's funny.
Here's a person who's trying to help you by making you uncomfortable.
And for someone who seems to eschew technology like that, he's kind of the reluctant hero in this. Mm-hmm. He doesn't want. He's kind of like Mal from Firefly.
Right.
Doesn't really want to be involved in anything. Just wants to have his cargo and get paid, and that's it.
Yeah.
And then he kind of is sucked into this whole drama that he wouldn't have a psychology hologram, wouldn't have a hospitality hologram. Mm-hmm. He would delete them. They would never show up. Maybe he'd have the medical person because that kind of does have a purpose. Although we are introduced to Rios as having this giant piece of metal embedded in his arm. And he's like, here, let me get some analgesic to numb the pain. He's like, no, I don't need that. Why are we doing this? Is that the only way that we can telegraph that he's the tough guy?
Right.
Is that he's got something embedded in his arm and doesn't want to go into surgery because he doesn't have the time to bleed. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That irritated me as well.
Yeah.
A lot of things irritated me, I guess. And you?
Well, one of the things that we talked about with the Enterprise incident was it kind of came up again in this with Hunky Romulan and being on. I guess this was the flashback episode where they showed what happened with the admonition, but they're not alien enough. Like nothing that they did in the bedroom was alien, and nothing that happened on the planet aside from the actual like flashing back, getting their mental image was alien in nature.
Yeah, no, you're right. And that kind of goes to the idea that they had these opportunities to show some of the weird stuff that goes on with Romulans.
Yeah.
And it just didn't, they just kind of felt like nuns.
Right.
A little bit, who knew Kung Fu.
Right. Yeah.
What are they called? They're called the Nosh.
The Zhat Vash?
Zhat Vash.
Yeah.
And the Talsha Yar, which all I hear is Tasha Yar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Who thought that up?
Right. Somebody who worked on Star Trek, and nobody went, you don't think that might be
too close?
Yeah.
It's just an L. You put an L into somebody's name. Okay, so and then 7 of 9 is introduced at the end.
Yeah. I did like in the next episode, I'm pretty sure that Rios, he calls her 99, which is a Get Smart reference. And then he calls her 11, which I believe is the British Avengers TV series. Also a reference to the female on that one.
Oh, okay. Which episode is that? 4 or 5?
This was episode 5.
5.
Yeah.
Right. And episode 5, I felt like starts with the torturing of Egypt. And I felt like, oh, definitely not a kid's show, number one. Mm-hmm. And but I also felt like this is what I wanted from the science fiction of the show. It's consequences of some sort of event, like long-term consequences of Borg being reintegrated into society. This would be one of them. Their hardware is, as far as we can tell, super advanced and very valuable. And so there would be kind of these terrible people who would start extracting them from these people.
Mm-hmm.
And I liked it. We got a little hint of it. They don't really go into it, except that there is this culture of them and they're bad people. That's all we get into it. Like, they could have done a whole episode of 7 of 9 hunting these people down.
Right.
But we didn't get that. We got more philosophizing.
Well, and
stuff.
we don't know the background between 7 of 9 and Picard, and that would have been a great way to merge the two. We do get a flashback, maybe, interspliced between another episode, maybe a whole episode devoted to it because it still has Picard in it, but showing how they met, how they connected, how they were working together, how they split apart, and what the history is to the two of them when she shows up.
Yeah, could have been nice.
Mm-hmm. But they didn't do that.
Well, I got the impression that 7 knows who Picard is, and Picard knows who 7 is, but they just read about each other in Time magazine,
Right?
but they never actually met. But they kind of are familiar with. I know it's implied they met at a party or something like that. Maybe they had sex. Maybe that's what happened.
Okay. Went from
And it's
peripherally
awkward.
reading about each other in Time magazine to maybe having sex.
Well, you can see, they both have a little too much wine.
Right. Yeah. Anyway, so we already talked about him being what did you call him? An S&M space pirate. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I'm sure this has been dragged.
yeah.
over
So I just
for
want to say,
everybody.
people talked about how obnoxious it was, but here's the thing: he was only obnoxious when he was actually with his friends. He was over the top and being ridiculous, and I was worried that's how he was going to play the entire time. But once he got down to the actual bar, I didn't think that he was that bad. He didn't say a lot and he didn't do a lot before everything was revealed anyway. But he was just extravagant and flamboyant when he was hanging. He was talking about how he can play the bad guy or whatever. And then when he got down to the planet, I felt it was much more subtle, and I was not as irritated or disgusted by it as I thought I would be.
It just felt so embarrassing. They're all dressed like pimps. I'm sure I'm not the first person to say that, but they all are. Rios was, Picard was, what's her name was.
Yeah.
I just did not feel. I guess 7 was dressed as 7.
Right.
Funny thing to know, if I'm doing it, you're doing it. It seemed so unnecessary.
Mm-hmm. I did like, though, that she went back and just killed the person. Wasted no time.
Yeah, I always want, when there are terrible people like that who are responsible for terrible things, shooting them so they die instantly always just feels like it's not cathartic for me.
Mm-hmm.
I want
know.
them to be.
I know.
I want them to be tortured or
Right.
something like that. It's not, especially what they did to Icheb, poor little Icheb.
Yeah.
By the way, why did she have to kill Icheb? I understand he got his eyeball pulled out, but Hugh got a new eyeball. They can give new eyeballs.
Right.
Why was he on the verge of death that he had to be executed?
I think it was everything up to that point. She was looking for so many things inside him. That was my interpretation, was that she had pulled so much out of him that he was not going to survive if she took him off that table.
I don't know. It seemed like she should have tried.
Yeah.
Give him a little sedative.
Right.
Put him on the ship. Do a little try before you start euthanizing people.
Especially your child. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. That's true.
But I understand why they did it.
No, but
I
that's
think it was
true.
actually the same
As a
actor.
parent, she would have done more emotionally. She would have tried to lift him off and see how much damage there was done, and then go to the computers and try to do something to try and like you said, sedate him or stitch something up, and just realize that there wasn't anything that she could do, and then just go back to him and then take care of it. There should have been way more of a scene rather than just her being like, I can do something. He's like, no, don't. She's like, okay, close your eyes.
So I've got a great little segment. 5 minutes you dedicate that. He says, please kill me. I'm in so much pain and I don't want to do this anymore. And she's like, no, I can save you. And so she takes him, and there's this whole montage of her rebuilding him, and parts of his anatomy just stop working. So she has to cut them off and give him a new robot. And then his arm stops working, cuts it off, gives a new arm. His left side of his face stops working, makes that a robot. So by the end of the 5 minutes, you have basically Darth Vader.
Oh, I was thinking like she was making him Borg again.
Well, that would have been better. That would have been a little bit more in canon. But like the idea that there's nothing left of Egypt,
Right.
that she's just hanging on to what she thought by defying him, all she was doing was being selfish, just kind of rebuilding, like cloning your dead dog type of thing,
Right. Yeah.
which you can do
Yeah.
now. It's doable.
So, so I have a note here. Just in the moment, it was very funny, at least to me. Hopefully, listeners think so too. If you leave this in, so they're talking about Bruce Maddox and his condition on the medical table, and the camera is on Aggie as she's listening, and she has kind of a steel look on her face, or like a face where she's like just resolved to do something or something like that. And I wrote in my notes, I'm even more convinced Aggie is a spy. And then she turns around and kills Maddox. And so I wrote...
And then you wrote never mind.
Well, I wrote, and with her killing Maddox, I'm pretty convinced.
I would have liked it if you'd written, I'm almost convinced at this point that she's a spy after she kills Maddox.
Right.
Could be.
Just need one more clue. But speaking of Bruce Maddox and Aggie, she's watching a video of him making cookies with all the replicated parts to put together the cookies before he sets them on fire. And then they're kissing. And unless she's like, I put who was filming the video for this.
Right.
Like that means
Good point.
She was holding the camera off to the side like selfies, like people do now. And yeah, took me out of that moment.
Unless they have, they have those very hyper realistic drones that kind of fly around with a camera, so they're having a nice intimate moment.
Right.
And there's a right in front of them.
Well, I mean, it could also be kind of what you were talking about with When the Bow Breaks, that the room itself just has the camera, but it was also POV at the beginning, so that's wrong too. I don't know.
That's all shaky and stuff.
Yeah.
Like it's handheld, except it's almost like but it's they have an Arrested Development documentary crew.
When the camera spins off to the side, you see like the 3 camera guys and the light technician over there.
Yeah. They kind of goose the camera every once in a while.
Right.
What episode are we on?
We're on episode 6 now.
No, 6. Okay, so Picard makes it to the artifact, finally. And he feels kind of weird about it, I guess. There would be a moment I felt like he wouldn't want to go in. I guess they have that moment. And this episode seems to have the most philosophizing about life and individuality. There's just a lot of talking between characters about this stuff. So many missed opportunities to do procedural things as opposed to characters talking in a room.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, and this was the episode where Raffi then tells Rios why she was on the planet, like going to meet her son. And this is where we should have seen that moment. And before this, it should have been, who is the mole in the group? Is it Aggie? Is it Raffi? Is it Eleanor?
Right, yeah.
And then we would have figured out that Raffi was not the one because she was actually having a hard time with her son.
Right. But we get a little bit more information about the artifact and Hugh and all these different things. I wanted more. I wanted more of that stuff on the ship. And really what they were doing with the ship, I know that they were reclaiming Borg, but were they also trying to reverse engineer Borg technology? What was the purpose of it? Like what
Right,
was
like
the grand scheme of things?
Yeah, if you're not doing it to save the people, which clearly the Romulans were not, then yeah,
right.
like it must have been to get the Borg technology.
So episode 6 wasn't really much of an episode for me. Nothing really happens. I guess Soji discovers there's something weird about herself when the hot Romulan tries to kill her. That's
Right.
the most interesting part that happens, and she tries to run around. All the fighting and stuff, all of the fisticuffs. I mean, there's some of that in almost every episode. Mm-hmm. Can you name more than 1 or 2 examples in Next Gen where there was fist fighting, right? Where there's this over-elaborate choreographed stuff.
It definitely doesn't happen in more than one episode, more than once in an episode, but it does happen in multiple episodes. Even the episode with the throat bugs, they they threw down in the admiral's quarters. Remember?
Yes, but would you put those into the same category as this? Right?
Not at all.
Right. Like it felt like there's a lot, and again, I guess this is them catering to what audiences want to see from their science. I mean, science fiction now equals action. Mm-hmm. There is no really science fiction that doesn't mean action to them. Like I feel like I actually started watching. I've watched the first little bit of the original series first movie, Star Trek the movie.
Right.
And there's a sequence where Kirk is going to the new Enterprise, and it's got to be 5 minutes of them just doing beauty shots of the Enterprise, no talking, just music and shots of Kirk and I think one other character, maybe it's Chekhov, I don't remember.
Right.
But
their
doesn't
reaction
matter.
to seeing it. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was 5 minutes of that.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's what they're coming from, right? I don't know. I preferred it. I was almost like, oh, this is kind of boring, but also, I kind of like it. I like the pace.
Right.
The pacing of this show is totally different. And I know I'm not the first person to say that. I'm also not the first person to say, oh, this doesn't really feel like Star Trek. But I like I'm trying to express why it doesn't feel like Star Trek. Why does this feel so unfamiliar?
Right, because there's definitely a lot more action to it. I mean, it feels a lot more like the movies, and not the first one.
Yeah, it feels more like the J.J. Abrams movies, right?
For sure, but I mean, I would even say it feels more like First Contact or Insurrection for sure.
Yeah,
or
you're right.
Is it Insurrection? Nemesis. That's what I was thinking of.
Yeah,
feels more Nemesis. I would say Insurrection feels a little bit more like the first movie, and that's probably why it didn't do as well. Because in the longer settings, which is what this is, it is very hard to wax philosophy for 90 minutes, or in this case, 6,000 minutes, 600 minutes, 6,000 minutes.
6,000 minutes. Felt like it.
This episode actually made me realize that this whole series was not unlike the first Scooby-Doo movie, where they couldn't decide.
That.
What?
I wasn't expecting you to say that.
Where they couldn't decide if it was kind of a wink and nod to the older fans, or if it was a fun movie for the kids. And so this is kind of the same thing. Like they couldn't decide if it was a series where people who casually knew about Picard could watch it, or if it was going to be a series that had references to the old series. And they couldn't decide, if it was going to be serial or episodic. Like this was the episode where they talked about the artifact being an abandoned Borg cube, and it's like that's already been explained 2 episodes ago. Why do it again? And like they had Hugh in this episode, but I also realized that by this time he shouldn't be called Hugh, because they're trying to take the people out of the Borg collective and give them their identities back, but Hugh's not his name. Like they decided to call him that because he was like, I'll be you.
Right, but that was his first introduction into humanity after being part of the Borg, and so maybe they were saying he remembered that. I don't remember in that episode if he is reassimilated into the collective in the next gen episode. I don't remember.
I think so, because there was that follow-up episode where there was just that small group of Borg, because his individuality as part of the Borg actually corrupted those other Borg units, and so they just dropped them off and abandoned them.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, I didn't mind Hugh being in it. I felt like that was a nice nod to the old ones, where it wasn't, hey Hugh, remember when you were on the ship and we rescued you from the Borg? Like, it wasn't that.
Right.
It was, he's just a character that was from the old show. Like that's, I was okay with that kind of referencing.
Yeah, but it would have been fun if he had first been introduced with a different name, and then when Picard came on, he was like, Hugh? And he's like, oh, haven't been called that in a long time.
He just shoots Picard. Nobody speaks.
Locutus.
Yeah. I want to push back for a second. So you had said earlier that Star Trek is family friendly and supposed to be for people of all ages. And I would agree with that in the sense of ratings, where, they're not swearing, sisters aren't having sex with their brothers, and There's not the liquefying of people's faces on television.
Right.
But I don't believe that Star Trek is for kids. I don't think, I don't, in the sense of, I don't think kids would get it. Yes, they can watch it, but in the same way that reading heavy books about, heavy literature books are not really for kids either. They don't have the mental capacity or experience to really understand what's going on. Sure, they can watch it for the spaceships and the laser beams, but not really for kids. I think I started watching it 10 through 12 or something like that. But I didn't really start getting it. I didn't get it until I watched it later. And maybe that's because I'm intellectually stunted, perhaps. I don't know. But I don't think it's for kids.
No,
I don't think kids can really understand.
Right. So I would argue if you started watching it at the beginning, you watched it when you were about 7 or 8, not 10 to 12. But also,
I meant when I started watching it, not when it first came out. I don't think I started watching it when it first came out.
Okay. Because I did. That's why I was assuming that. My dad was a Star Trek fan, and so like when the new series started, that was kind of our family thing. It was Sunday night before school. It was the end of the weekend. We all had dinner on our TV trays and watched it together. But nostalgia aside, like I agree with you that you don't get it, but you could still watch it. And this Picard series, like kids really, they shouldn't be watching. It specifically says mature audiences. And so, and when you did watch it, when you were 10 to 12, like it wasn't like you were confused by what was going on. You were just not getting the same weight from the episode as was intended for the adult audience.
Well, there was a depth to the episodes that a 7-year-old could not possibly get
exactly
the entirety of. And all I'm saying is Star Trek was not produced so kids could watch it. It wasn't. Yes, they can watch it, and maybe they can get something superficially from it, but it's not for kids.
Right. It wasn't produced with kids in mind, but it was produced in a way that kids could watch it.
I'm just saying for different reasons, both Picard and Next Gen were not produced for kids.
Right.
Like, so this idea that either that because kids could watch the former, that this is somehow, that Picard is somehow a divergence from that, I disagree with. I think neither of them were ever produced for kids to watch.
So what I'm saying is Picard is not a way that anyone can be introduced to Star Trek. And I don't mean that means no one can. What I mean is it is not available to everyone where you could pick an episode and say, watch this and it will make you like Star Trek.
Yeah.
So that
seems unrelated though to the kid thing.
So every other series before this one, families could sit down and watch the episode. Depending on the episodes, kids may not have been able to either understand it or the parents wouldn't have been comfortable with their kids watching it. But the series as a whole, the family could sit down and watch it. This is not one of those.
Right, but for different reasons. I think neither of them are for kids, just for different reasons. That's all I'm saying. Yes, I agree with you that kids can sit down and watch it because there's no faces melting off. But that's irrelevant to me because it doesn't matter. The content is inaccessible for the most part in both scenarios, or for both shows, I should say.
See, and I feel like if it was completely inaccessible, then kids wouldn't have enjoyed it. Regardless of how much pew pew was going on in there, like it wouldn't have been fun to watch. I think what you're saying is just as an adult you can appreciate it more because of the depth in the content.
Yeah, same thing could be said for Picard. You can watch certain parts of Picard. The kids can watch certain parts of Picard.
Oh yeah, this
absolutely
could be cleaned up and put on TV, and it would be watchable for everyone. So what my point is why not do that? Why do you have to make it dark and grim and gritty just because?
I think then you don't get people like David Fincher. And then you don't get you don't get movies like Die Hard. And you don't get, right? Because there's a certain edge. It's almost like when they made Die Hard PG-13, when Die Hard 4 or 5, which is ridiculous. I can't believe I said those words. But when they made it PG-13, it loses something. it loses an edge, and not just because they're dropping F-bombs, but there's just not casualness. There's an aesthetic to it. It's not just about using naughty words.
Right.
It's the whole thing. And they obviously set out to make a very dark expression of Star Trek, which I don't mind. I don't care that there's swearing in this. I don't really care that it's violent. I do kind of mind. I don't really like heavy action.
Right.
I'm just kind of it gets boring to me, whether it's fighting or spaceships doing stuff. It just gets old to me. But so in that sense, I do mind, but for different reasons. But I don't mind that they did that. I kind of mind that they weren't true to the DNA of what Star Trek is or used to be. I feel like you can do both. And I don't feel like they succeeded in this particular case.
Right. Well, so for me personally, kind of going way back to the beginning for us, like that was kind of why I wanted the criteria to be what it was. You know, we tried the B plot for a little while and we realized that wouldn't work for the original series. I wanted the criteria to be specific to Star Trek as a franchise, but able to kind of, you know, take a step back from it and say, like, whether it is a legal procedural or it is an action thriller or, you know, a referential comedy, like you could still take the three criteria and say, this is a proper Star Trek episode because it did deal with, you know, it dealt with a personal issue that people can relate to, but it also presented sci-fi in a very unique way, you know, and that's
sure.
And so I think that this this series as a whole did do that. I mean, it does deal with two people chasing after a MacGuffin and trying to get there before the other one does, but the MacGuffin itself and the ways they got there had enough sci-fi elements in it that was presented in a unique way that I feel like it does make it proper Star Trek.
Are we dropping the mic? No. The bomb? Yeah. We're dropping the bomb, not proper Star Trek? Is that what we're saying?
No, I'm saying it is.
Oh, well, I feel like we need some examples. We need some examples specifically of where there was science fiction and where it was novel, like a novel representation of science fiction.
Right. Okay.
We have to get to them. Get to them.
So I just did it in strokes of the episodes. Episode 1 had a unique life form, you know, with the twist of there being another one and also them having to be in pairs. I know it wasn't explored in the way that either of us would like, but again, it's not how well was it established. It's just, is it there? And is it required in the plot? And the answer is yes to both of those. And after the twin died, Picard made that ethical choice to go save the twin, even though she didn't even know about him.
Right. But I disagree that he made a choice. I think he was always going to do it. There was no back and forth about it. Wasn't a dilemma. It was just, I'm going to go do this. And honestly, he kind of did it for himself, right? Because I'm too busy. I need to get busy living or get busy dying. And he got busy living.
Right.
It wasn't really, I think he felt like it was the right thing to do.
Okay.
But it wasn't like, I'm not going to go do this. And his pets, his Romulan pets, had convinced him at some point.
That's true. They were actually trying to convince him not to.
But he never was. He was resolute.
Right. No, that's a fair point. So, I mean, there are.
By the way, I like that we just skipped going through the rest of the episodes, and now we're into the resolution.
Well, I mean, this is kind of what we do. Like in the back half is usually where we share it anyway. But
right,
because there are some other things that we stopped right before we started talking about Riker, which is actually where the series picked up, I think.
Episodes 8, 9, and 10 are pretty much like where it really kind of takes off.
Yeah.
For me, anyway.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I feel like maybe we should look at this as one giant movie, as Picard is a giant movie with chapters, and that we don't necessarily need to subdivide them into episodes in terms of was there science fiction or not.
Okay.
But let's take. I mean, that doesn't discount any observations that we've already made about the episodes.
Right.
But let's take it as a whole, because I feel like there are so many instances where there are ethical dilemmas, like should you sleep with your sister?
Should you sleep with a robot?
Right? Yes. guess the answer is yes.
Should you send someone who you know is dying off into space?
Yes. I guess the answer is yes. Well, no. Everybody tells him no, and then he goes by himself anyway.
Right? That's true. That's true.
But in terms of just science fiction, the few things, number one is the Borg ship.
Right.
I feel like all of their stuff around, all of the plot line around the Borg Reclamation Project, that feels very Star Trekian to me. I wanted to know more, and also the consequences of the ex-Borgs and them being harvested for parts, etc. That felt that world, that kind of world building, felt very Star Trek to me and very science fiction-y, and also felt very novel. We've never seen that kind of thing in Star Trek before. But I don't know, like, it really wasn't about that per se. That was just kind of background to help build the world, which I'm fine with.
Yep.
I like that. I feel like part of science fiction is world building.
Right, of course.
So I'm on board with that aspect of the show. I don't know. Also, the Romulan admonition. I guess what could have come from that in terms of who these beings were. We got a few glimpses of it when we're kind of being shown what Agnes and in the flashback episode where we see what the admonition looked like to all these people. That, by the way, there wasn't really much in these visions when they put their hands on the glowing rails.
Right.
Wasn't really much in there. It would have been nice to like have a few very disturbing images, like from Event Horizon or something
Or
like
just
that.
Show nothing. Just leave it to the audience's interpretation.
Right. Just something. I mean, I guess they needed to imply that destruction was to follow. But I felt like I wanted to see more of that.
Right.
And at the end, we do get to see these sort of centipede-like figures coming out of the hole, a la Marvel. And it was interesting. I want to know who these people are.
Right? Yeah.
And I want to know why are they destroying? Like, why aren't they ushering in peace between two and advocating for synthetics between and humans? And but they're just destroying all
Organic life.
What you call it?
Yeah.
Organic life. And that seemed like a good, I guess you could say, MacGuffin for the show. But I wanted there to be more. So I guess the potential of that felt very science fiction. But again, they didn't really go for it. They didn't really push it in. But it might be enough to designate Picard as proper Star Trek.
Right. Well, so I mean, looking at the entire series, you just kind of have to skip 2 through 5 because that's just, what if you were to do this in like a single movie, that's the montage of him collecting his people. And so he learns about synthetic life, Data's daughter, and he learns that there are 2 of them. And he then collects the twin and learns that there's a whole colony. I was going to say a whole planet, but that's not true. There's a whole colony of synthetic life forms, and now the twist is that they are going to destroy everybody.
Right. They seem to be they don't like living in exile, so they felt like we are on the verge of being destroyed by the Romulans, so let's call these guys. I don't necessarily blame them at this point because they're constantly under the threat of annihilation, and they have these saviors who can come and make everything better. And they're saying, well, do you want to destroy everything else for your salvation? And their answer is yes. And I guess it's hard to blame. Although they make it seem like that's the bad decision.
Right.
Because they have evil Soji who kind of takes the place as, we're gonna call them. They make the synthetics the bad guy through her.
Right.
And they didn't need to do that.
No, they really didn't.
Yeah. The incentive was there for them to want to call these beings down. They're under immediate threat from a battalion of Romulans.
Right.
Yeah, we understood. We didn't need there to be some sort of evil Soji that is pulling the strings.
Going back to what you had originally said, I think that it would take some serious heavy lifting to make this a series not Star Trek because of how many things are used within it that you have to know from Star Trek without it being like, they're putting that in as kind of a Deus Ex Machina. Like I'm just thinking about the Borg subspace tunnels. Like that's from Voyager. And
right.
if you had this without it being Star Trek and just being various aliens in this space setting. And, they have this ship and the opponent is farther ahead and they have to figure out a way to get past them. They're like, wait, what if we go into, a parallel dimension that allows us to travel faster? It would be criticized, as being a Deus Ex Machina because that hasn't been established until the very end. But everything in this was referenced previously in Star Trek. And so I do think that there's a lot of elements within the plot and the story where sci-fi is required, and not just sci-fi, but Star Trek sci-fi.
So they get into that. So just as an aside, when Seven opens up that portal or whatever they call them, the conduits.
Oh, conduits. That's right.
She starts driving the ship with her hands as a Borg drone.
Right.
It's an interface that's holographic. And tell me something. Why would these beings, this race of beings who have multiple USB ports embedded into their face, why they need to manually drive anything? Why can't, she's already plugged in. She can't just think about where she wants to go and it goes there. I felt like this is where it pisses me off and starts to deviate from Star Trek, because you're just doing pretty lights for them to hold on to and like pretty things that appear on the screen.
Right.
This isn't science fiction. It's just cool stuff. Like, wouldn't it cool if they use their hands like that? The cool part was, like, for example, the octenary planetary system, when they're looking for this home planet. And I forget who, Rafi asks one of the holograms on the ship. She says, what? She shows him a diagram or something. It's like, oh, that looks like a depiction of an octenary system. And she says, well, this is a septenary system, which are very rare, but octenary wouldn't exist because of how complicated it would have to be. And they kind of go into it. I was like, I was riveted. I was like, oh, this is cool.
Right.
This actually has a little juice to it. And then they said, well, why would you want to do it? How would you make it? You have to drag the suns to where you want them to be. And I wanted there to be some sort of segment, instead of philosophizing about life, have a segment where they show these beings dragging suns into a particular place, which would be, it's along the lines of a Dyson sphere type of monumental challenge.
Yeah.
And show that.
So.
That's yeah. And Rafi, in explaining it once again, we have to wait for the characters to catch up to what the audience knows as Rafi explains this whole octenary system to all the rest of the characters. But instead of her explaining it, have there be some kind of scene where they show how it may have worked.
Right.
Instead, they just briefly kind of scratch the surface on it, and then it's gone. It's never heard of again.
Right. It was just to find the place on the map. It wasn't to, like, there wasn't any significance to the octenary system beyond that's where the planet is.
Right. And if the whole show had been peppered with those types of things where they mention them, but they never really dive into them, I would have been okay with that. Right. But I'm so thirsty for that, and they only give us like one every couple of episodes that it's almost not enough.
Right.
But there are enough of them that maybe the writers get the benefit of the doubt. Should we talk about the whole sequence with Riker and Troy and the daughter?
Well,
I actually liked the daughter.
And I like that they have this this basic cabin out in the woods until Picard tells them that they're kind of under attack, and Riker's basically like, cabin, shields up.
Yeah. Nothing changes. We'll still make pizza outside, but shields up.
I thought you meant like there was no computer.
Oh, that'd be awesome too.
Riker's just losing his mind. Like,
or he knows that Picard is losing his marbles too. So he's like, he'll buy this.
Right. Thank you, number one.
I'll be in my ready room.
Right.
He goes into the shower.
Well, and he's just like, upstairs, one to beam up, and like just quickly runs up the stairs.
Just runs up the stairs. And Troy's like, I hate it when he visits. But they didn't do that.
Right. Well, and I actually, so the scene where the tomato was burnt and that's where the black smoke was coming from in the oven, I genuinely thought that something was going to happen to the oven where like it was going to explode or something like that, where Riker or the daughter were going to be stuck or hurt, or in danger. And Soji was going to use her android abilities to save them.
They give us a little bit of a demonstration of her abilities, but we don't really get. She's not really. I mean, the only thing that she can do is fight people. She has strength. That's really the only ability that she really has throughout the course of the show.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, she can kind of hack stuff, but it's never really. It doesn't really, like, no one says, hey, can you calculate the distance between this and this and tell us how long we're going to get there? Like, kind of the way they use data
Right.
in the show.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and she also had information accessible to her. She just didn't know it was in there until people talked about it. And she could move really fast. Like, there was a scene in the Borg cube where they were talking about how she was breaking through, they had an object coming towards them, but nothing could move that fast. In the first episode, when she ran up the stairs, that was pretty cool.
Right.
But you're right. Like, there's another scene where she's really upset with everybody and she slams her hands down on the table and nothing happens to the table. I'm like, you're really mad and having an emotional outburst, and all you do is hit the table?
Another thing that bugs me that's illustrated in that scene and kind of this whole episode is, okay, so Soji is upset because she thinks she's responsible for leading the Romulans to the synthetics homeworld.
Yes.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Or at least, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's another thing I'm tired of. And we can get back to Heroes, the show Heroes again.
Ugh, right. Yeah.
It's another thing
I think I know where you're going with this.
Where characters feeling responsible for consequences of actions they bear no responsibility for.
Right.
Right? It doesn't, I hate it. It's like, you can't possibly have, that's not your fault.
Right.
Like, everybody knows it. But yet it's the same thing as when a character has these amazing abilities as, like, wants to go into hiding because they think they're a freak.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like, no, that's not how humans work.
Right.
No. If you can jump over a stadium, you're not sitting at home not jumping over a stadium.
Right.
You're going to go ahead and do that. Otherwise, people who can already do amazing things, like athletes and magicians, they do them. Right? They don't sit at home being like, I'm a freak. Nobody else can do what I can do.
Right. Yeah.
I hate it. It's such a lazy crutch
Mm-hmm.
to get an emotional scene out of somebody.
Yeah.
So it almost is a demerit on the show.
Right. No.
It is a demerit.
I would agree that it is a demerit. I mean, without there being a justification for it other than I'm a freak. I mean, in this, there was a vague justification insofar as people are trying to kill her, so she's got to lay low. But
Not being a crybaby.
right.
That's what I say.
I mean, and also she just learned that she's only been alive for 3 years, which
Crybaby. Come on. Can do amazing things. And like Picard said, like, it doesn't mean that you're not a person.
right. But give her time. Like, I understand that, like, they are on a ticking clock and she does have these cool powers and she shouldn't be, like, shying away from them. But imagine if you just learned that your lifetime of memories were fabricated 6 months ago and you've only been alive for 6 months. Like, everything you know of your...
It would be weird.
Right.
It would be weird. I would take a day to get over it. Right? But I'd reset.
Right.
You know, I wouldn't dwell.
Right.
Especially because you're a computer.
Yeah. That's fair.
So in the next episode, when they arrive at the homeworld and right afterward, Rosie says, well, that's unexpected. This giant Borg cube comes out of the conduit.
Right.
And it was cool to see it going through the atmosphere because that's the first time we've seen that.
Mm-hmm.
Never seen a Borg cube try and just jam itself into an atmosphere.
Right. And it's kind of unbelievable that there would be any survivors.
I mean, I always do the math of the Borg are not stupid.
Right.
That they would have some sort of way of cushioning a fall like that.
I did like the Romulan defense against the Borg of just opening the airlock.
That was cool.
And just letting them all get sucked out
Why
instant
is that
vacuum.
a feeture on the Borg cube? We won't know.
Oh,
So it seems
I
like a very
assumed
dangerous
that it
feature.
was a modification that they had made to the Borg cube.
Oh, okay.
Like when they first had it, they were like, let's put in this safety protocol.
Where it just sucks all the Borg.
Right.
A lot of Borg.
Yeah.
But I will say that in this episode, when Picard makes his speech to the rest of the crew, I think this is after they've crash landed. He makes a speech about his illness.
Yes.
And that, yes, I have this illness. It is terminal. I don't know how much longer I'm going to last. This will be the last time we talk about it.
Right.
End of story. And then he moves on. Okay, what's next?
Uh-huh.
That was the most Picard he was of the whole show. I was like, yes, Picard, he's back.
I think that conversation that Picard had with Rios at the end of episode 8 was also a moment of like just classic Picard. which I think is also the same episode where he talks about his death, or was that in episode 9?
I don't know. Kind of all blends together.
Right.
But we can say, I think it's safe to say that Picard, in terms of classic Picard, only shows up a couple of times.
At the end, yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess when he's trying to make his appeal for humanity, and life for all, that's when it was Picard's turn to shine.
Right. So then we meet near the end of episode 9. We meet Golden Soji.
Yep.
Also known as Evil Soji. Soji Lin. No.
Not Soji.
Not Soji. She has a name. I don't remember what it is.
Right.
Doesn't matter.
Nope.
But she does a mind meld with Agnes.
Yes.
And I hated this part. It felt super lazy. They felt like, look, we have very little time to get everybody on board with what this whole admonition is and what the destroyers are. So let's just do a mind transfer. But I thought that this was something you needed a specific kind of brain to do, that it wasn't technological. How can a synthetic do a mind meld with a human?
I don't.
It's not a technique, right?
So I don't know how a synthetic can do it to a mind meld, or can do it to a human, but Spock did do it to a machine. So it is.
When?
What?
When did he do it to a machine?
In one of the original series episodes.
Oh, that almost doesn't count.
Almost, but also almost doesn't count.
Barely. Does it count? I don't know. Listeners, let us know. I say no. Jonathan says yes.
No, I'm saying it has been established in Star Trek.
Coward. You are a coward.
I'm saying it counts because it's been established in Star Trek. I'm not saying, but again, I don't know if there has been a time where an android has done the Vulcan mind meld.
Okay.
I mean, they can do the Vulcan pinch.
Yeah, I guess that's true. But is the Vulcan pinch some sort of telepathic element where you're putting them to sleep? Or is it just they know the physiology really well and that's what they use it for?
Right.
But it just felt a little lazy to me that they need to get from point A to point B.
No, I would agree with that.
Way.
Well, and Golden Soji, I feel like, is completely unnecessary, especially the fact that she is turned off at the very end. Like, there's no reason that Soji couldn't have done a heel turn and been the one to say, they're right.
Evil Soji or regular
Soji. Like, there's no reason that she couldn't have had the realization that, yes, like, she is the destroyer and she's okay with that because the synthetics deserve to live too and we need help. We have a fleet here. And they realize the Starfleet is coming, and she's like, we have 2 fleets. We have a fleet that already banned us, and we have a fleet that wants to destroy us. Like, it would have just been so much more powerful if she wasn't just a sheep going along with her evil twin.
Yeah. I don't think we needed her.
Right.
Like, they could have combined those 2 characters.
Exactly. And you could still have that moment with Narek because she did feel pity for him. And so instead of killing him, she just let him go and said, I don't want to see you ever again.
Really bad move, either way.
Right.
Bad decision.
Yeah.
Also, there's another weird character thing that happens where, so we have this character, Agnes, who kills a good guy for no reason other than you could argue she was under some sort of spell from the Romulans. She was being controlled kind of passively through this information. She had been brainwashed. So, I guess I can let that go. But then there's a scene between Dr. Soon.
Sung, yeah.
Real life data.
Yeah.
There's a scene between him and Agnes where she comes in and he says, shame on you for killing a very bright light in a very dark place. And first of all, shame on you for killing somebody. Shame on you for peeing on the rug. Shame on you for killing Dr. Maddox. And then he's like, you want to make it up to me? You can make me a ham sandwich. And we can be fine. It felt like we let her off the hook quite quickly.
Right.
For that stuff. I've always kind of, I don't know, I guess if you're arguing that the Romulans were in fact controlling her passively, then maybe it's okay. Maybe we let her off the hook. But
you also don't say shame on you at the same time?
Yeah, shame on you.
Right. Like, what you did was inexcusable, but I understand that it was out of your control.
Right.
Yeah.
And we need you.
Yeah.
I'm hungry.
Right. And sandwiches aren't going to make themselves. Not yet, anyway.
We're working on it. So then episode 10 happens where the synthetics are for sure going to call the destroyers, or whatever the race is, the synthetic race through the portal. And they have the battle and there's this back and forth. Picard dies after he does the Picard maneuver again.
A new Picard maneuver,
no-
which I still didn't understand what the Picard maneuver was.
They just used the device thing to make a bunch of different warp signatures so they wouldn't shoot at the planet that they temporarily basically stalling them. I don't know. They kind of brush over it. Yeah, I think it was just a stall. But anyway, it happens. He dies. They bring him back to life. And we have this whole scene with Data. It's like a little epilogue with Data.
Right.
I was very surprised because first of all, I was thinking Data has been alive this whole time. You have this whole show. Why aren't we using him? Why isn't he in the show more somehow?
Right.
I mean, I get it. You'd have to kind of tweak it a little bit.
Yeah.
But maybe you put a little bit of Data inside of Soji or whatever, however you do it. However you make Data mobile from his quantum simulation. But it was just a little disappointing, because everybody loves Data.
And we only get
So
him
why
at the
not
beginning
have him in the show?
and a little bit, and then at the end.
Yeah.
Well, and the other part too for me that actually made the very ending of his dying disappointing is that wasn't real either. Like it wasn't a dream for Picard, and it wasn't it wasn't Picard actually being there with him. It was Data's death and Picard being like kind of a symbolic send off for him. But Picard was actively pulling the drives that contained Data, which ultimately is what killed him. And Data was picturing it as him lying on the couch with Picard sitting next to him.
And I understand that them killing Data like this was probably more of a function of Brent Spiner not wanting to do Data anymore. But just from a storyline point of view, why not have Picard promise to Data that he will kill him? But something happens where they can't kill him. They need him for something. Something that is special about Data. They need to bring him along. So they bring him back to life for the second season, right? For whatever reason. Bring him back. And he still has like an off point. Like he's still going to die. They put his death into motion. It just takes a little while. And so a lot of what's happening to Data in the second season is there's a ticking clock to his death. And they need to utilize him until he dies. And that's part of the stakes is that we need Data. He's going to die. Let's hurry up.
Right. Yeah.
But nope.
Nope, they didn't do that.
They didn't do that. And then they make Picard an android. And I guess real life Data was going to be the one who transferred his mind into that.
Uh-huh.
And which I don't know why that was a big deal. Why couldn't they just make a new one?
Well, A, why couldn't they make a new one? And B, why was he so like nonchalant about giving that up?
Yeah. Yeah. I agree.
So
I agree.
Yeah.
But the Data stuff was kind of fun. He still got it,
Mm-hmm.
They both still got it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so overall, I really did enjoy this series. I'm super excited for the next season. Like I'm looking forward to seeing Q and Guinan and, how it's all going to play out.
By the way, that wasn't a spoiler. Those are in the trailers,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Is Q in the trailer?
Yeah.
He is?
Yeah. Q was
I've
in the
not
very
watched
first
it.
teaser trailer where they showed nothing.
Oh.
They showed Picard's.
I've seen nothing.
Okay. Sorry. Well, then maybe you didn't know that.
No, I only know that Q is in it. I only know that there might be time travel and that Guinan is now in it. But
okay, so where do we land on this? Is it proper Star Trek?
I don't want to go along with what everybody else says.
Right.
I want to be the outlier, but there just wasn't enough.
Yeah.
Really. I mean, it's almost there. They had a lot of good creative concepts in there, but they just didn't play them out. They were more peripheral.
Right. Well, yeah, and that's the thing. They were more peripheral. If you break down, it's just there was a girl who was special and she had a twin, and this guy needs to put together a group of people to save her twin. There are sci-fi elements within that, but nothing is integral to the plot. This could be a Prison Break season.
Yeah. It's sort of generic science fiction.
Yeah. Yep. I did.
So,
I mean,
yeah.
the stuff in it is, there would have to be heavy lifting if it was brand new generic sci-fi. It's just some kind of new series, or the stuff would have to be established early on for it to pay off at the end, which they didn't have to do in this, which was kind of nice. But yeah.
Well, and even the science fiction concepts are just not played out.
Right.
It's kind of just an action show.
Mm-hmm.
And the main character, Picard, is kind of marginalized. He kind of plays somewhat ineffective, kind of apprehensive. He's not super confident. He's kind of just, he has a goal in mind, I suppose, but it just didn't feel like Picard to me. And I feel like that should be, if you're going to have a character and you're going to call the show after the character, I understand they have to change in the last 40 years or whenever the last time he was on aboard the Enterprise,
Right.
but this much?
Exactly. Yeah.
So no, Picard is not proper Star Trek.
Did you enjoy it?
I liked it. It was kind of disappointing at times. I wanted there to be a little bit more cohesion. If I'm just taking away the idea that it's not Star Trek and just as a show.
Right.
I mean, there were moments that were kind of nice.
Yeah.
You know, I really like Rios and the ship and everything that happens on the ship. I felt like it was almost kind of a Firefly type of thing.
Yeah.
Didn't like Rafi.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing really, she didn't really add anything, to be honest. I thought that Agnes was really well played, a little inconsistent at times, but I felt that she was well played. And I like the idea of Elnor.
Right. All right, man. 100 episodes in the bank.
I know, can you believe it?
Yeah. I know, it's crazy.
Almost 2 years.
Right? Yeah, we've got 4 more episodes, then it'll be 2 years. Maybe we should do Discovery for our 2-year anniversary.
Oh, so many episodes.
I know. Oh, well. Speaking of which, let's see what we're watching next.
No.
All right, so next time we are watching Star Trek, the original series. Season 2, Episode 7, Aliens on a Mission of... Season 2, Episode 7, Cat's Paw. Aliens on a mission of conquest hold the crew captive.
Are they feline in nature?
Says nothing about that.
Oh. Okay. Seems kind of generic.
Right?
As they go, but
that was from Prime.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I guess we should go watch it.
Well, let's do it.
I've been Paul.
I've been Jonathan. Dang it.
And this has been The Measure of an Episode.
But you already knew that.
Give it one more time. One more time. Dial it up.
That wasn't dialed up.
No, that was nothing.
All right. But you already knew that.
All right, that'll be fine. That's like a 7.